I remained. Epigraph. Pain does not erase you. Abandoning yourself to avoid it does. KX. Part 1. The condition of absence. I did not wake up. Waking is for those who have a life waiting for them, a temporary departure from which one returns. What happened to me was not a return. It was an arrival into a state I had not chosen, a sentence passed without a trial. Awareness came not as a dawn, but as a wound, a sudden, stark realization that the damage was already complete. I existed, and the first thing I knew was that something vital had been torn from me, and its departure had been anything but quiet. It began as a weight, not a physical pressure, but an internal anchor, lodged deep beyond the reach of thought or word. It was inert, a permanent fixture that had seemingly replaced the organ responsible for feeling whole. I attempted to breathe. The instinct was a ghost, a muscle memory that triggered a phantom rise of chest I could no longer feel. There was no air, no relief, only the hollow pantomime of an action stripped of its purpose. That was when fear seated itself. It did not crash over me. It seeped in, a silent, chilling acceptance of a terrible truth. I searched for orientation, for ground, for sky, for any axis to define my existence. There was none. I was not standing, nor floating, nor falling. I was simply present, and this context-less presence was a perfect, silent prison. I tried to move. The command left my will, but there was a lag, a thick resistance I had to push through before any part of me responded. The movement, when it came, was wrong, a gesture missing its meaning. I ceased the effort, understanding that a command which hesitates is a command that cannot be trusted. Time was not a river here. It was a stagnant pool where moments bled into one another, stretching and collapsing without rhythm. I could not measure my tenure in this void. Then a thought arrived, cold and settled. Maybe I have always been here. It was not a question, but a dread possibility I had been evading. Memory did not return in a flood. It resisted. Fleeting fragments would appear, a color without a name, a sound without a source, a feeling so sharp it promised revelation before vanishing. They slipped away when I tried to grasp them, not as things lost, but as things rejected. I realized a mind does not lose what it cannot carry. It conceals it. The word formed, a heavy, foreign object in silence. I waited for the rest of the sentence. There was, the will be, but nothing followed. I did not know what came after. That emptiness was more frightening than the silence itself. The silence was not an absence. It was a presence, total and suffocating, erasing the boundary between my interior self and the void outside. There was no escape from its completeness. And then it changed. I did not hear it. I felt a shift in the fabric of nothingness, a subtle alteration that signaled I was no longer alone. The new presence was familiar, not as a comfort, but as a chronic pain one carries for too long. You are aware sooner this time. The voice did not travel to me. It simply was, as if it had always been a part of my own mind and had only now decided to speak. I tried to recoil, but there was no direction in which to flee. "Who are you?" I asked. This time, the words held their shape. "You always ask that first," the voice replied. It was calm, devoid of kindness or cruelty. Certain, I need an answer. "You already have one." The silence that returned felt heavier, laden with implication. "I am what remains when you choose to forget everything else." The words settled into me with a dangerous ease. That was their peril. Truth does not always feel new. Sometimes it feels like a debt long overdue. "I don't understand," I said, even as I knew I was not lacking understanding, but courage. "You understand enough," the voice countered. "You simply refuse to accept what that understanding means." No, my denial was swift, a reflex. The observing silence felt more pointed. "You are earlier than before," the voice continued. "That is unusual." "Before what?" "Before you begin to realize what you have done." A pattern stirred within me, a deep cellular recognition. "This has happened before," I stated. "Yes." I waited for the shock of the revelation. It did not come, only a hollow, chilling recognition. To feel familiarity without memory is profoundly unsettling. "How many times?" The answer was slow in coming, enough that counting stopped helping. The internal weight seemed to tighten its grip. "If this has happened before, then I failed." "You always arrive at that conclusion." "I don't remember failing." "You chose not to." Something in me cracked. Not as shattering, but fissure and thin. Why am I here? This time, the question was stripped bare, carrying the full weight of my despair. "Because you chose this." "No." "Yes." "I would never choose this." "You did not choose this place," the voice clarified, its tone unwavering. "You chose what protects you from." The silence pressed in, dense and expectant. "Why?" I asked. For the first time, the presence felt closer, clearer, almost tangible. "Because remembering required you to endure something you believed would destroy you." And in that moment, something opened inside me. Slowly, painfully, a feeling surfaced, raw, heavy and unavoidable. Loss. It came without an image, without a story. Only its pure, undiluted essence. What did I lose? I whispered. The silence that followed was awaiting itself, unbearable in its pause. "Everything you built yourself around." The answer did not echo. It took root, and in that terrible, quiet moment, I understood the core of my emptiness. I am not empty. I am erased. Part 2, the return of what was buried. The awareness of my own erasure did not bring clarity, only a deeper, more specific dread. The void around me felt different now, no longer a passive emptiness, but an active confinement, designed to hold what I had tried to discard. The weight inside me began to change. It was no longer still. It shifted, a slow, tectonic movement, as if something buried was testing the integrity of its tomb. The emptiness I had accepted as my state of being now felt fragile, a dam on the verge of failing. "You feel it," the voice said. It was not a question. The presence felt nearer, as if the concept of space between us was dissolving. "Yes," I answered. There was no point in denial. The resistance had bled out of me. That is where it begins. I did not ask what it meant. A part of me, deeper than thought, already knew. The knowing was a cold pressure in my core. The first thing to return was not memory, but a physical echo. A tightness bloomed in my chest, anchoring. It did not feel like an invasion. It felt like a homecoming to a place of pain. I focused on it, and instead of pushing it away, I let it remain. This acceptance was new. The tightness deepened. A fragment surfaced. Not an image, but a sensation. Warmth. Proximity. A profound familiarity. Then a violent, instantaneous absence. The warmth didn't fade. It was severed. The void it left behind was sharper and more painful than the surrounding nothingness. "What was that?" I asked, my voice thin. "A fragment," the voice replied. "You are not remembering the event. You are remembering what it did to you." The distinction was a blow. The memory itself was still buried deeper, and I was only feeling its aftermath. Why can't I see it? Because you are still trying to understand it instead of allowing it. The truth of this settled heavily. Understanding was a shield. Feeling was surrender, and I was being forced to surrender. The pressure built again, more insistent this time. Another fragment emerged. A voice, not the one in the void. This one was softer, warmer, layered with a history I could almost touch. It resonated in a place nothing else had reached. I lunged for it with my mind, desperate to hold on. It dissolved like smoke. "No, wait," I cried out. "You cannot hold it like that," the voice stated, its tone unchanging. "Then how?" A pause. Then the words that would change everything. "You do not recover memory by force. You recover it by no longer resisting what it brings." The path was clear now. The pain was not the obstacle. It was the path itself. The weight rose higher, becoming more defined. And this time I saw something. Hands. The image was blurred, but the intention was clear. They were reaching. Then they were holding. Then they were empty. The feeling that crashed into me was total and unequivocal. Loss. Personal, specific in mine. I lost someone. I said, the words confession. Yes. The confirmation made it real. A stone tablet etched with truth I could no longer ignore. Who? You already know. No. I protested, but I could feel the shape of the answer pressing against the walls of my mind. You do not lack memory, the voice said. You lack the willingness to accept it. The fragments continued their assault, each one a piece of a shattered whole. A burst of laughter cut short, a significant weighted silence, a word poised on the tip of my tongue, forever unremembered. They were incomplete, but the emotions they carried were whole. I understood then. Memory returns through emotion long before it returns through image. I felt a profound internal weakening. The fortress I had built to protect myself was crumbling from the inside. I can't do this, I whispered. You already are. It's too much. It was always too much. There was no pity in the voice, only fact. I tried to retreat, to find some corner of this void away from the onslaught, but there was no corner. There was only the advancing truth. Why now? I asked a final, desperate plea for reason, because you can no longer sustain the effort it takes to avoid it. The answer was final. Avoidance is not a passive state. It is a constant, exhausting labor, and my strength for that labor was gone. Another fragment came, stronger and clearer. I was somewhere else, a place with substance, with texture. It felt real. They were there, in front of me. I still could not see a face, but I knew their presence intimately. It was a part of my own architecture. And then, they were gone, not fading, not leaving, gone. The absence was an absolute, a finality that struck with the force of a physical blow. Something inside me collapsed. They're gone, I said, the word hollow. Yes. I couldn't stop it. No, I should have done something. You are not remembering change it. The voice said, its clarity brutal. You are remembering because it already happened. The finality of that was the sharpest cut yet. This was not a nightmare from which I could awake. It was a permanent record. Regret surfaced and corrosive. I failed them. Silence. And in that silence, I believed it completely. A new thought formed. Loss does not just take the other person. It dismantles you and rebuilds you into someone else. Someone shaped by the absence. The fragments slowed their pace. Not because they were finished, but because they were making way for something larger. You are close, the voice said. To what? To the part you erased completely. Fear, sharp and primal, returned. No. Yes. I don't want to remember that. You already chose not to once. A pause, then the devastating conclusion. And this is where that choice led you. The silence that fell was absolute. I understood now. Forgetting had not been my salvation. It had been my incarceration. And now, the warden was unlocking the door. Everything I had avoided was returning. A final thought settled into me, cold and hard. What you refuse to face does not leave. It waits until you are ready or until you no longer have a choice. The next memory was rising. It was not a fragment. It was not a ghost. It was whole. And for the first time, I was not afraid of the pain it would bring. I was afraid of the person I would have to become once I finally remembered. Part the moment of self-betrayal. The final memory did not approach. It simply was. There was no transition, no gathering of fragments. The dam shattered and the past flooded in, not as a recollection, but as a relocation. I was there. The ground was solid and unyielding beneath my feet. Air, thick and real, filled my lungs. Sounds had origin and meaning. The rustle of leaves, the distant hum of life. The world had texture, scent, dimension. It was a brutal return to reality, I had forfeited. And then I saw them. They were not a ghost or a blurred impression. They were whole, vivid, and undeniably present. The sight of them was a punch to a soul I had forgotten I possessed. For one suspended moment, everything was intact. There was no foreboding, no shadow of what was to come. There was only the profound, simple truth of their existence. And in that moment, I understood the cruelest trick of memory. It allows you to fully inhabit a paradise you are about to lose. They spoke. I heard my name, not the hollow eye of the void, but my name, the one they gave meaning to. It carried a universe of shared history, of quiet understandings, of a life built together. I wanted to freeze time, not out of ignorance, but out of perfect, agonizing knowledge. I knew the script. I was an actor forced to reenact a tragedy, line for line, wound for wound. A change began, subtle as a shift in the light. The air between us grew dense, charged with an impending fracture. The world held its breath. No! I whispered, but the word was already useless. The event was in motion, a boulder pushed from a cliff millennia ago. It unfolded with a terrible, meticulous slowness. I saw every detail I had erased. The slight hesitation in their expression, the exact way the light caught their eye before it vanished. There was no chaos, no violence, just a seamless, irrevocable transition from presence to absence. They were gone. The absence was not an empty space. It was an active force, a vacuum that tore the fabric of my being. It did not ask for my comprehension. It demanded my surrender, and something in me broke, not with a scream, but with a silence. A fundamental part of my architecture gave way. I had believed the loss itself was the unbearable part. I was wrong. The memory did not end with their disappearance. What I had truly erased, the memory I could not survive, was what I did next. I watched myself. I saw my own body, standing on that solid ground, perfectly still. The world had ended, and I had not moved. I did not cry out. I did not fall to my knees. I simply stopped. Grief had not overwhelmed me. It had bypassed me entirely. Something deeper had shut down. I saw myself take a step back. Then another. It wasn't a retreat. It was a withdrawal, a severance. That was the moment of the true fracture. I left. I said, my voice of strangers. I didn't stay with the pain. I didn't face it. I left. The voice was there, a quiet witness. Yes, I couldn't carry it. No. So I excise it. I cut the memory out. Yes. The silence that followed was thick with the weight of the self-betrayal. I thought forgetting would save me. It protected you, the voice said, its tone not of absolution, but of simple fact. A pause, but it also severed you from yourself. The truth landed, heavy and final. The pain of the loss had been terrible, but bearable. The act of abandoning myself in the face of it was what had unmade me. Pain does not erase you. Abandoning yourself to avoid it does. I looked at the memory again, at them, at my fleeing self, and I did not turn away. I let the full, unvarnished truth settle. I chose this, I stated. Yes. I chose not to feel. Yes. And that is why I disappeared. Yes. There was no judgment, only the stark geometry of cause and effect. I stayed with the memory. I let the pain wash over me, through me. It was a torrent, but I did not fight it. For the first time, I was present for my own destruction. And a strange thing happened. The pain did not lessen, but it changed. It lost its chaotic, drowning quality. It became a landscape, something I could stand upon, something I could hold without being consumed by. The void around me began to shift. It was no longer an empty prison. It was simply space. It had depth and potential. The crushing weight inside me softened, transforming from a stone of avoidance into a scar of acceptance. The voice began to fade, its purpose served. What happens now? I asked. That depends on you. On what I choose. Yes. The choice was clear. There was no future without this pain. But there was a future where I could integrate it, where I could carry it as part of me, not as a separate, exiled horror. I stay, I said. The words were the heaviest I had ever spoken, but they were also the most solid. They did not echo, they anchored. For the first time, there was no resistance in me. The memory settled, not as a foreign invader, but as a reconciled part of my history. The pain remained, but was no longer a master. It was a testament. The voice was gone. I was alone, but I was not empty. I was complete, a whole being, pain and all. I took a breath, a real, deep, aching breath. It hurt, but it was mine, and I did not flee from it. A final truth settled, quiet and unwavering. You cannot choose a life without pain, but you can choose not to abandon yourself when it arrives. This time, I did not leave. I remained. Part 4, the architecture of endurance. Staying was not a victory. It was a discipline. The initial choice to remain was a single note. What followed was a symphony, a constant, quiet recalibration of self against the gravity of what I had allowed back in. The pain did not diminish. It transformed from a storm into a climate, a permanent weather system within me, its pressures and fronts now familiar, navigable. I had mistaken endurance for stoicism, for building a wall against feeling. I was wrong. True endurance is the opposite. It is the dissolution of the wall. It is agreeing to inhabit the open field where the weather moves freely, learning to stand without shelter. Reality did not return with fanfare. It seeped back in through small, unceremonious cracks. The feel of the surface against me, the faint resistance of atmosphere. These sensations were no longer threats to be analyzed, but simple facts to be noted. I received them without seizing them, a passive host to a world I had long refused. Time began to knit itself back together, not as a linear path, but as a lived-in continuum. Each moment was no longer a trap or an escape hatch. It was simply a room I occupied. The past was not a country I fled. It was a foundation of the house I now stood in. To be present was to accept the architecture of my own history, every crack and load-bearing wall. The absence of what I lost remained. It did not become beautiful or meaningful. It was still a raw, amputation-shaped space. But I stopped trying to phantom limb my way through existence. I let the emptiness be empty. I learned to recognize its contours, to move through the rooms of my life without pretending the missing wall wasn't missing. The instinct to flee was a seasoned saboteur. It no longer shouted. It reasoned. You've borne witness. That is enough. This is self-punishment, not strength. It dressed its proposal in the robes of mercy. This was its most insidious form. The promise of relief is a more potent lure than the fear of pain. I recognized the voice. It was the same one that had once sold me oblivion as a solution. I understood now that every flight is a circle. You only ever run back to the same problem, dressed in different shadows. So I remained, not with heroism, but with a tired, pragmatic certainty. I stayed because I had finally calculated the cost of leaving and found it infinite. There was no guiding voice anymore, no external arbiter. The dialogue was internal now, a quiet negotiation between the self that remembered and the self that endured. I was whole, not because the fractures had healed, but because I had stopped denying their existence. The cracks were part of the structure. They defined its strength, its history, its character. I shifted, not in space, but in orientation. The universe around me was no longer a void because I was no longer a void within it. Presence is not a location. It is a relationship. I had finally made peace with the terms. A final, grounding truth settled, not as an epiphany, but as a worn truth finally believed. You do not conquer your pain. You make a home for it. You give a room, and you learn to live alongside it. You do not become free from it. You learn the difficult, profound art of being free with it. I took a breath, a deep, unforced inhalation. It was not a gasp for life, but an acknowledgement of it. The ache was still there, a hollow echo in my chest. But the echo no longer defined the chamber. I was the chamber, vast enough to hold the sound and the silence that followed. There is no version of this where I am unscathed. No outcome where the loss is not a fundamental thread in my fabric. That possibility was erased the moment the event occurred. The only choice that ever mattered was this one: to build a life around the absence rather than a life spent fleeing from it. And in the quiet that was no longer silent, but simply still, I built. The end.